All right, welcome everybody to the Big Douglas Show. Here with Benjamin Albright today from KOA out in Denver, and we'll get him to open up his insider's notebook and take a look around the NFL. Ben, how are you?
I'd be doing pretty well if I had more power in my place right now, but I'm freezing. I'm wrapped up, and obviously I'd have the camera on, but it's here. I'll show everybody real quick. There you go. It's super dark here because the electric company, I guess, can't keep the power on or whatever. So yeah, we had a massive snow last night, so that probably helped. But anyway, yeah, no, I'm doing all right.
Out on the East Coast here, I didn't even think about the notion that power's out, and in Colorado, probably pretty cold.
Yeah, a little bit. It is. I'm bundled up in a couple of blankets and sitting on a futon right now. So
sounds like I'm back in college where we couldn't pay the bill there. We bundled up all the time. Ben, let's take a look at some interesting names that are coming up as we kind of look towards the college, or not the college, but the NFL coaching searches. Sean Payton, you think he'll be back this year? And it's interesting. Sean is an interesting mind. The record's okay. He's got a Super Bowl, but sometimes I wonder why such a big interest in Sean. What were your thoughts there on him?
I'm kind of with you on that. I feel like he's kind of the Marty Schottenheimer of passing, as it were. I think he gets a bit of a pass because of Drew Brees. Brees, people say that he turned Drew Brees into something, but Drew Brees was a Pro Bowl quarterback before he ever got to New Orleans. In his last two seasons with Marty Schottenheimer, of all people, and Cam Cameron, he had 55 touchdowns to like 22 interceptions. And that was over the last two seasons in a Marty Ball offense. So he was fine before he got there. If you look at by the numbers comparisons of Drew Brees, really what Sean Payton did was just let him throw more. More passing attempts because the touchdown percentages are roughly the same. They actually got lower when he got to New Orleans. The interception percentages were about the same. They ticked up for a minute and then they kind of went up and down year to year. So the numbers, the yards per attempt, all that kind of stuff, it was really about the same. The only thing that really statistically got much higher under Sean Payton was passer rating, which just says that Drew was probably a little bit more efficient. He was throwing less down the field, some more shorter passes, like those slants to Michael Thomas. And, so in the end, I think that's part of it. He's also been a part of, obviously Bountygate. Sean Payton would have been involved in tampering with the Miami Dolphins and the Patriots with the Tom Brady deal. He's a guy that I think is a good coach. Don't get me wrong. I do think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a great coach. If you go back and you look at the numbers, people always tell me, because, my preferred candidate in Denver would be Dan Quinn. People tell me that Dan Quinn wasn't anything without Kyle Shanahan. But then you go look in 2018 when Dan Quinn was with Steve Sarkisian, and he scored more points on offense that year than Sean Payton did with Drew Brees 7 different times. So, I'm like, well, wait a minute now. You're talking about a guy that everybody's saying is a Hall of Fame coach in Payton, who had 5 losing seasons with Drew Brees in his prime and had 7 seasons where he scored fewer points than Dan Quinn and Steve Sarkisian. So, to me, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I think the legend of Sean Payton sort of outpaces the resume of Sean Payton. I think he's a good coach. I don't think he's a great coach.
And he's going to cost you what, a first-round draft pick?
At least. With Denver, it's probably going to be like a first and a third, because Denver has San Francisco's first, which is going to be way, way late in the round.
Okay. Another name, Eric Bieniemy, who is always talked about in these cycles, never gets a job. There's got to be a reason. I refuse to believe it's because he doesn't interview well. What are your thoughts on Bieniemy, and why do you think it is that he hasn't gotten a head coaching gig yet?
Well, he has had some bad interviews. I don't know that he doesn't interview well is the reason. He's just had some bad interviews. It's a lot of things with Bieniemy. He has a very problematic past, including arrest history, multiple citations for violence, including choking a female parking attendant. I think part of it is people don't believe that he's the reason that offense goes. They believe it's Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes, and they cite looking at Matt Nagy's tenure in Chicago, where the offense was bad as part of that. You go back and you look at Eric Bieniemy's stint as an offensive coordinator at Colorado, and that offense was laughably bad. It was the worst offense in college football. They would routinely get delay of games on first down coming out after kickoff because they were unprepared. I think part of it is Eric Bieniemy's incredibly abrasive personality. He's tough to work with. Kansas City's been trying to push him out the door for a couple of years, to the point where they only sign him to 1-year deals at this point. They're desperately hoping he takes the OC job with Washington this go around. So, I think that Eric Bieniemy, the best thing he could ever do for himself is go somewhere else and be an OC, because if he does that and he succeeds, then all of a sudden he's going to get head coaching offers. And if he does that and he fails, everybody's going to say, okay, it was Andy Reid and Pat Mahomes.
A couple more interesting names that have been floated around. Ben Johnson, I guess, will wait for a better opportunity. Is that how you see it?
I don't know if better opportunity. I think he realized that the only job he was the front runner for was Carolina. And I think he realized all of a sudden that he wasn't the guy there, that owner David Tepper really wants Sean Payton and is willing to give Sean Payton anything, and that Ben Johnson was kind of his fallback. And I think at that point, Ben Johnson was saying, okay, well, I don't want to be anybody's fallback. I want to be your guy. And if you don't believe in me, why should I sit there and believe in you? So I think Ben Johnson did the smart thing. He's going to continue to get offers. The job he did with Jared Goff this year was nothing short of remarkable. I could see a team like Indy trying to say, hey, wait a minute, I know you pulled your name out, but you want to come be our guy. But beyond that, he'll have options next year, and probably both Los Angeles jobs probably come available next year. So that's something to look at. The Washington job, there's going to be jobs available next year.
The other one that I'm particularly curious about as a big-time Georgia Bulldog fan is Todd Monken. Do you believe he'll leave Georgia to take an NFL job?
I do. I don't know that it'll necessarily be this cycle. And I'm a big believer in Todd Monken, a huge fan. So, I would have, to be honest with you, if he were in this cycle, he would vault to the top of the list for me in Denver. I know he doesn't have head coaching, a lot of head coaching experience, but he's a guy that I think would jump to near the top of the list for me in Denver.
Better shot at getting hired this cycle, Kellen Moore or Dan Quinn?
Dan Quinn. I don't think Kellen Moore is going to be hired at all. His interviews have not been good. Last cycle he was in consideration for I don't want to say he was a front runner, but he was in the top tier for multiple teams last cycle, and his interviews were not particularly great. I don't. They had a good performance against Tampa, but the Dallas offense has been kind of hit or miss this year. Dak Prescott has had one of his worst seasons in terms of turning the football over. So Dan, I think, is very much in play in Denver, especially if Sean Payton goes back to the booth or takes the Panthers job. If Mike McCarthy were to be fired, Dan Quinn would be the front runner for that job. If in Indianapolis, Dan Quinn is in play as well.
All right, let's run through some teams that are in need of a head coach. You tell me your best guess as to who ends up with the job. Let's start with your Broncos.
I think it's going to be Dan Quinn. I think Sean Payton goes back to the booth or takes another job, but he very much could take the Denver job. So I think it's one of those two. I think the fallback there is either Jim Caldwell or Raheem Morris.
The Texans.
I think that's going to be John Gannon, but I think the fallback is, or the other option is DeMeco Ryans.
John Gannon, the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, right?
Yeah, yes, correct.
The assistant? Okay.
Yeah.
Cardinals.
Brian Flores is very much in play there. The new general manager kind of shifts that dynamic. I don't really have my finger on the pulse of it now they've got Austin Ford in there. I think Sean Payton's sort of in play there, but it's a long shot. I think that they are going to interview people some more. I think they're going to request some more interviews, and I think John Gannon's going to be one of them. We'll see. I think they're going to request some more interviews. And now that Austin Ford's there, I think that's just going to shift. They were initially, I would have said Vance Joseph or Sean Payton before they got the GM in there, but now they've got the GM, and so I think that's shifting a little bit.
The Panthers.
I think it's going to be Sean Payton or Shane Steichen, the Eagles offensive coordinator. I think that if Ben Johnson was a front runner there and he pulled his name, I think the fallback, if all else fails and disaster happens, is go back to Steve Wilkes.
And finally, the Colts.
That's the one that's the toughest to gauge. They've done such a wide-ranging search. Ownership is kind of pushing Jeff Saturday, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Dan Quinn or Raheem Morris if they don't get any of the other jobs. I'd really like to see Raheem Morris get a shot there.
Let's go through a couple of big names, quarterbacks, some that will still be on teams, some that will be free agents, and you just give me your best guesses what the outcome with them is. Let's start with Carr.
That's the interesting one. It really depends. If Raheem Morris gets a job in Indy and takes, for instance, like Greg Olson to come be his guy, wouldn't be surprised to see Carr wind up there. I don't believe the Colts will trade for Derek Carr, but I do believe if he was a free agent, they would pursue him.
Do you think that he'll just end up becoming a free agent?
At this point, yes. Nobody's put forth what it would take to get, to make it worthwhile for the Raiders. We'll see. But at this point, it's trending toward free agent.
Go back one step real quick. Of the head coaching jobs that are open, which one in your mind is the best one?
I think if you are in a vacuum, I think I think that Carolina has to be in consideration. They've got a pre-built defense. They've got draft picks. They've got a young offensive core. I think that has to be. I think Carolina probably has to be, and an ownership that's the second wealthiest owner. I think Denver would be, sort of in consideration, except that the problem is you've got the Russell Wilson contract, and if you don't believe in Russ, then that's probably not the most attractive job. I think, and they've one first round draft pick, but it's way late because it's the Niners. I think Indy, you've got the Irsay factor. That's tough. Arizona just fired Cliff and Keim. And it looks like with Austin Fort, you've got a good GM, but the problem there is that you're tied to Kyler Murray, and you're tied. It's not like the Denver situation where you can get out from under it after a year. The Kyler thing you're stuck with for like 2 or 3 years, so you have to believe in that. And then Houston has fired 4 coaches in 5 years. Like if you're a head coach, you're demanding like a 10-year contract there because there's just no way you're investing in that.
All right, let's get back to the quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson, I assume he'll get franchise tagged. Do you expect that he'll play for the Ravens next year?
I don't know. I think it's possible they repair that relationship, but it's a pretty fractured relationship. I wouldn't be surprised to see them franchise him and move on from him for like a pair of ones. I think Atlanta and New York would be very interested in that if that comes available. Specifically Atlanta, but right now that's really up in the air. I'll call it a coin flip. If they repair the relationship, good. If they don't, then yeah, he'll be on the market.
I'm assuming Aaron Rodgers is not going anywhere, even though I'm sure we'll hear about it all off season. It's almost impossible to move the contract, right?
Right. It's so ridiculous. And then him going on McAfee and talking about winning MVPs instead of winning Super Bowls. That was a big red flag for me too. I think he's going to be back because I think he's got too much ego to just retire going out like that. Not making the playoffs. So I think he'll be back for another year in Green Bay.
Which means, what do they do with Jordan Love? Just keep, how many he's got 1 year left and then the 5th year option, I think.
I don't think anybody thinks Jordan Love is the future there. So I think they'll just, ride out his contract and look for another developmental guy.
San Francisco spent a ton of picks on Trey Lance. Is he still in the plans for next year? What happens with Brock Purdy?
I think you have a legitimate competition in camp between Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. I think you give them both a chance to earn it, So that we'll see how that goes. There's the Tom Brady kind of factor there as well. That's something that could be in play, but I think it's probably comes down to Purdy and Lance because I think Brady probably goes to the Raiders.
Okay, that was the next one was Brady. You think Raiders, and then I guess that leaves Garoppolo.
Probably the Jets. I think it depends on who they get as NOC. You could also see him maybe go to Indy, depending on who gets hired there. That's just that's tough. Once we figure out the Indy head coach situation, some of these others get a little clearer, like with Carr, obviously as well. So, but I think the Jets are in play as well.
If you had the first pick in the draft, like the Bears do this year, are you trading it for a haul, or are you trading Justin Fields?
Well, if it were me, I'm probably trading Justin Fields simply because I have some of these quarterbacks rated higher. The Bears will probably trade down. They can get more for the first round pick than they could get for Justin Fields anyway. So, I think that's something you have to kind of eyeball. I do not expect the Bears to make the first overall pick.
If you're making that first pick, you prefer Young or Stroud?
I think Bryce Young's a little bit better player. It's not to say C.J. Stroud isn't, and he certainly CJ Stroud ended his collegiate career with his best performance by far. And I think that's a lot of people's exposure to CJ Stroud is seeing that game. You go back and look at other games and, there's been some problems. I think both those guys will have success in the NFL. I'm a little less sold on Will Levis, but he's in that tier with scouts. Out of this class, I like some other guys too that you could be had later, guys like Hendon Hooker or Anthony Richardson. So
it was a shame to see Hendon Hooker get hurt that late in the season.
Yeah, it really was.
I think maybe I like Hendon Hooker third best out of the group. CJ Stroud scares me. I know they say don't scout the helmet, but the fact of the matter is they just haven't had a quarterback succeed in the league. I don't like since whenever. I don't even know. And of course, Bryce Young, I think he's the best that's come out in a while, actually, but his size scares me. And maybe that's not fair because I watched him get beat up in the SEC and he just kept on rolling. He really didn't miss many games in his career. Who does his size scare you more than CJ Stroud's helmet does?
Not really. We've seen Bryce Young succeed, like I said, in the SEC. You just mentioned it, and that's really it. It wasn't like Tua where he kept getting hurt. And with Tua, Tua never learned how to fall. You ever watch Tua fall? He's so stiff. That's why he gets concussions. That's why he has hip issues. Like he never learned how to fall. Bryce knows how to take care of his body, and he's a little bit bigger, I think, than people think he is. Some people are trying to say he's smaller than Kyler, which is absolutely false. So, he does need to put on a little weight, at 5'10", 190. I think he needs to come in, and he needs to get up to about 215, but he'll get there.
I agree with you. One of the reasons, Ben, I wanted to have you on was because, the Broncos have kind of just gone through this ownership thing. So I thought we could, correlate it to the Commanders a little bit. First of all, do you have a bead on who you think will end up with the team?
I don't right now. I think a lot of that because Dan Snyder hasn't put publicly out if he's selling the whole team or part of it. There's a lot of animosity there between Snyder and Bezos would normally be a buyer. So I think right now we're kind of looking at, trying to figure out what it is that they're actually selling. And then, you kind of figure it out from there.
So I know Ron goes in and talks with Dan about a quote unquote budget sometime this week. I'm curious. So people will say, they won't have a very busy offseason because they're selling the team. The team doesn't get sold till, say, the end of March, and you're halfway through, basically the important stuff of the offseason. When giving money and contracts out, how does the money go? Like, I mean, the Commanders say it's Daron Payne. Commanders are paying Daron Payne. Who gets stuck with the bill? Does it go into some kind of, I guess that's what I don't understand. It doesn't come straight out of Dan's pocket, right? So if he makes that deal, it's not like Dan owes him. The next owner of the team will. Run me through kind of how that works.
Well, Dan does owe him, but it runs through the team, like as you said. The Washington Commanders owe him that money. Now, all of the guaranteed money in a contract has to be in an escrow account 2 weeks after signing the contract. So the full cash value. That's why when we talk about cash over cap, that's why owners that are wealthy have an advantage because, sometimes it's difficult for teams to be able to work up that much cash. You don't just, you can't just pay, for instance, when Justin Herbert comes up for the Spanoses, who are one of the cash poor owners, they're going to have every guaranteed dollar in an escrow account ready to go 2 weeks after signing that deal. So that's the thing. And the organization does that. And the ownership can just give the organization money. They're free to do that. But that's how that works. Now, if Dan's in the middle of selling it, the onus for that cash would fall on Dan Snyder unless the ink is dry. And now they can work something into the back end of that deal where they spiff Snyder back. The new ownership says, hey, pay him, we'll pay you back for it kind of thing. But that's generally roundabouts how that works.
And you expect this to be a lame duck year for the Commanders, basically. Do you have any idea what kind of offensive coordinator they'll be looking to bring in?
I know they're interviewing Pat Shurmur, but I don't think that's a serious candidate. I had heard a rumor about Eric Bieniemy, so I think that's the direction they're going to go. I think Eric Bieniemy is going to wind up being the guy, but we'll see. It really is up to kind of Bieniemy at this point because he's not going to get a head coaching job this cycle. And I think he got one interview, and so it's going to be up to Bieniemy to see what he wants to do because his contract with Kansas City, like I said, was only a 1-year deal. They're trying to push him out the door, so I think that's probably going to be his best fit.
Do you think there's anything that Ron can do in the upcoming season? Like, say they make the playoffs, I don't necessarily see that happening. Is there anything he can do to convince a new owner and new power structure to keep him in place?
Win. Win.
Yeah.
Win football games. You're in a tough division for it, though. You got an ascending Giants team, you got a Philly team that's obviously tough, and you got a Dallas team that's tough. You're in a tough division to do that. So if Ron Rivera can come in and prove he can win in that tough division, I think that goes a long way.
The defense was remarkably improved this year. Are you surprised that there hadn't been any looks at Jack Del Rio?
No, Jack runs a very vanilla scheme, and Jack as a head coach is not really a thing anymore. I think Jack's got some, he's had his time as a head coach. He's a defensive coordinator kind of from here on out. His scheme is rather simple, but it's effective. It's one of those things where if you know your assignment, execute your assignment, the defense will be good. And if you don't, you won't, you'll get exposed. So I like Jack Del Rio. He was obviously out here in Denver for a while, but he's I'm not surprised that defense plays well. He's a good defensive coordinator. I don't think he's going to get head coach run.
Last time you and I talked, which was a while ago, I think maybe last season, a lot of people were high on Scott Turner and thought eventually he'd get head coaching interviews. Who owns more of the onus on the lack of offensive production? And do you think people still feel that Turner can be productive given a better situation?
Yeah, I mean, Scott's got a positive and a negative in that last name, right? Everybody's going to assume he gets jobs because of nepotism, but part of that was I don't think Scott was set up to succeed in terms of personnel. He was asked to make chicken salad out of chicken, what, and at the end of the day, that's a tough ask. Do I think that Scott had his problems? Absolutely. I think there were some play calls there that I felt like were bad or wrong calls situationally. I think there were some second down dive type plays that I'm like, dude, you're just trying to get a few yards. Why aren't you taking a shot at this? But I understand that he felt that his offense was limited and had to try to get some yardage to set him up for makeable third downs. So it's a chicken or egg argument there. I think Scott Turner shoulders some of the blame, but I don't think he shoulders all of it.
They are apparently telling offensive coordinators or asking offensive coordinators how they will use Sam Howell. He'll get every chance to be the starting quarterback. What were your thoughts on Howell coming out of UNC?
I like Sam Howell. I thought he was underdrafted. I thought he was drafted later than he should have been. I think he's more mobile than people think he is. I think he's a smart guy. I think he needs a lot of reps. And I think that you may not like the first quarter of the season with him as a starter because I think he's going to take a while to really kind of let the game slow down for him. So if you're going to do that with Sam Howell, you got to be committed to him long haul, and you got to understand that this is a game by game growth process with him, and that he's probably not going to be good right out of the gate.
I mentioned Daron Payne earlier. A lot of the fan base wants to retain him. They've made it sound like it's a priority. Tough to pay 2 defensive tackles, huge money. What do you think he would command if he hit free agency?
Daron Payne?
Yep.
Yeah, he's going to get he won't get the Aaron Donald deal, but he'll get he'll get somewhere in that vicinity. I would take the Aaron Donald deal and knock off about 15%, give or take, and that's what it's going to be. It'll be structured a little bit differently, simply because the way the Kroenke team there structures things. But he's going to get Aaron Donald minus 10%, Aaron Donald minus 12%, basically.
Do you think the Commanders will give it to him, or do you think they'll tag him? Because I can't see them letting him walk out the building for the comp pick.
Yeah, I think they'll tag him. They've never been shy about using the tag. I think they'll tag him. I think that's a smart thing to do, honestly, and then kind of figure it out from there. The idea would be tag him, tell him don't sign it, let's work on a deal, and then you can sign this if we don't reach a deal.
Yep, got you. I think that's the right way to go too. The tags like $18 million. And you're right, that allows them to kick the can down the road 4-7. Let's get to the playoff games this weekend. Jacksonville at the Chiefs, 8.5 for the Chiefs. How do you like them to cover that spread?
I do. I think Andy Reid will absolutely smoke his former pupil in Doug Peterson. And I had the Jags beating the Chargers, and I had a perfect super wild card weekend. So, but I think the master bests the student in this one. Kansas City's a more talented football team, top to bottom, and you're not going to have a coaching implosion like you did against the Chargers.
I had a clean slate this weekend myself, except for that Dallas game, and I really kind of thought Dallas was the better team. However, I couldn't get myself to not bet on Brady. So yeah, I was with you on that one. New York at Philly is 7.5. Do you expect them to cover that one?
That's going to be interesting. That's the one I have a giant circle and a question mark around. All these other ones I think I've got a pretty good pulse on. It just depends on what Giants team shows up. They can be effective. Now, the offensive explosion they had this past week is a byproduct of a bad Vikings defense. I don't think they're going to look that good offensively. The question is, can the defense step up to kind of cover for that a little bit? They're also going to need to run the ball more effectively than they did against Minnesota. Only 9 carries for Saquon Barkley. Now, they did get him involved in the pass game, but they're going to have to run the ball effectively in order to beat Philadelphia.
You think the Giants re-sign Jones next year at what, $30 million a year? It's a big
I
number.
do. I think he played well enough. I think that they finally found the system that works for him, and I think they will re-sign him.
Geno Smith, he's going to get a big contract from the Seahawks, you think?
Big is a relative term. He'll get a number that looks big, but really it's year-to-year type deals. With team outs. So, that's the right way to do it. At this point in his career is, hey, how long is this sustainable? We're going to reward him, but we're doing it year to year because we're not sure how sustainable it is.
Cincinnati at Buffalo, the number I've got is 5.5.
I like Buffalo in that one. I think they're just kind of a team of destiny right now. Cincinnati playing really lights out football. Wouldn't be surprised to see them make me look like an idiot. But I like Buffalo in this one. If Cincinnati's going to win, they're going to have to run the football. Their offensive line is their Achilles heel. The way to beat Buffalo is to run right at them and run at the ends in that Tampa 2. So they're going to have to run the football effectively early and often in order to be their best selves. And I don't see Zach Taylor doing that. I see him getting away from the run and going to pass when they get down early.
Last one is Dallas at San Francisco, 3.5.
Yeah, this is a fun one because I want to see Dan Quinn versus Kyle Shanahan, right? It's at 28-3. This is a redemption. He already got the redemption against Brady on Monday night. Now you get the two architects of the implosion going head to head. So there's like a kind of a symmetric storyline here that I'm really jazzed about. I think that the 49ers defense is vastly more talented. I think that the Dallas Cowboys have more talent across the board. I don't think that the coaching on the offensive side for Dallas is as good as the coaching on the offensive side for San Francisco. And I think as long as San Fran keeps it fairly close and can run the football, I think they have the best shot. So I'm going to take San Francisco, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a Dallas upset.
I probably will not talk to you before the Super Bowl. So who do you like in the big game?
In the preseason, I predicted Buffalo versus Green Bay, so I'm going to stick with the Buffalo thing. Green Bay, of course, didn't make the playoffs. On the NFC side, I think it probably comes down to Philadelphia or San Francisco, maybe Dallas, of course, if they can beat San Fran. So I'm going to roll with Philly. I know it's a little chalk, but I'm going to roll with Philly.
Ben, you're the best, man. I appreciate the time today.
No, absolutely. Anytime, bud.
I know.
Mm-hmm.